What if I told you in your intro to psychology that the mind is the brain?
2 seconds later.
Oh my goodness!
Do you want me to have an existential crisis? Can't stress how bad that statement is when you say the mind equals the brain. Because do you know what psychology means? Seriously. Logi means study, and then psyche, mind. So, study of mind. The very instant that you're doing psychology, you're trying to know what the mind is all about, not what the brain is all about. You might as well just call it neuroscience at this point. When you admit that psychology is a science because it takes the scientific approach to understand human behavior, when you also admit that science requires three fundamental features in order for something to be deemed scientific, that is, systematic empiricism, empirical questions, and public knowledge. And when you also admit that pseudoscience refers to beliefs and activities that are claimed to be scientific but lack one or more of the three features of science. That is, those three things that I mentioned prior, which is absolutely hilarious because if you're a psychologist that holds to a materialistic worldview, then the field of psychology would be deemed pseudoscience by definition without you even realizing it. Nearly everything in psychology would be deemed unfalsifiable, immaterial, and are nothing but internal intangible frameworks that can't be tested empirically. However, for you to just throw away psychology would be extremely stupid because consciousness exists. And we're not going to sit here and act as though consciousness is material all of a sudden because we know it's not, or else you would have found it sitting somewhere in the brain. So materialism has no choice but to remove consciousness out of the equation in order for you to buy in to this idea that the mind equals the brain. Although consciousness is so self-evident, you're being extremely ludicrous to reject it as it requires the awareness to deny it in the first place. And don't get me started on people using evolution to explain psychology. Evolution, a scientific claim, as it means to make up for the unscientific claims that objectively exist but can't be explained empirically. It makes no sense because it's a categorical error. It goes something along the lines of, we gain these unscientific abilities because we evolved over time for the sake of survival, or from an evolutionary perspective, XYZ. Just stop it. Stop it. It's vague, it's baseless. And Charles Darwin, the very guy himself that talked about this evolution theory, had horrible doubts of evolution, his own quote. But then, think about it this way.
If you cannot reduce mind to matter, then evolutionary naturalism collapses. We are in the information age. Information is usually carried on material. Information is not material. It's immaterial. Why don't we do an experiment? He said, what's the experiment? I picked up the menu. And he said, what's the problem with the menu? Roast chicken. I said, that's the problem. For you, not for me. He said, why? I said, R-O-A-S-T. Those are marks on paper. Yes, they are, but they say roast chicken. I said, how do you know? Well, he said, I've learned English. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. You've learned English, and you give those marks a meaning, and you're a reductionist. Everything physics and chemistry. I said, okay, you explain to me how those marks convey the idea of roast chicken, and just use the material of the paper and ink. Dead silence.